Tantalus Entertainment presents the Killer Score Podcast.
Hey everyone, Daulton, Richie, and Erin here from Killer Score. Sadly, this will be your Halloween episode, but we're still going to make it up for you by giving you some cool recommendations for just different spooky media that we think are cool, or just things we want to shout out. Personally, I'm upset we couldn't get this done, but it was unforeseeable circumstance. This movie's actually incredibly hard to get, but I've bought us a Korean copy of the film that'll work on American DVD players, so yeah.
Whoops.
Oopsie.
So, as usual, you know what Killer Score is about if you're tuned into us so far. If not, we take a look at cult films with really good soundtrack we believe deserve more praise. And today's episode was planned to be near dark, but unfortunately, as I just said, didn't turn out or pan out that way. Once again, though, I'm Daulton Morrison, also known on most online handles as Sick Jacket Man. You can follow me on YouTube and Twitter with that handle. Erin, what's your...
I'm Erin. I am from witchandcrafts.com. I also have a Twitter and an Instagram at Nair Murray. I'll put those links in the description. We are also now on Spotify, and we will soon be on YouTube, so you can... Killer Score, I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And you can check out those episodes there as well.
Richard Eckert here, Richard's Rad Voices. Currently on YouTube under simply Richard Eckert, and as Erin had alluded to soon, I will be moderating our YouTube channel at Killer Score. You can go on either of those channels for the podcast and for my own voice acting endeavors.
Yep. So I figure I could start us off by, recommending a few horror stuff that I think is pretty good that I feel people should check out right now. One, I first thought I would give a shout out, obviously, to Shudder, because I love all of their work. There's a bunch of great stuff on there right now that you can check out of theirs. And particularly, they are running a bunch of Elvira stuff right now, because it was recently the 40th anniversary of the first Elvira broadcast, which is awesome. And she's got a bunch of special new stuff planned for that, including a look at the cult classic 70s horror film Messiah of Evil. So there's that going. Oh, and Cassandra Peterson herself has also released a new memoir, which I hear great things about. And also for horror media, if you've never read it, I'm going to recommend a few horror comics to you. First off, I want to recommend... it's sort of horror light, but there's definitely horror elements. I would love to recommend Neil Gaiman's old Sandman comics to you. I think that's a great place to start. Same goes for Alan Moore's Swamp Thing comics. If you can find collections of the old EC Comics stuff, I know they're kind of hard to get nowadays, but check your local comic shops. Maybe you can get like the hardcover prints of like Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, all that stuff. And there's some really good independent horror comics out right now, like The Ice Cream Man. I read a few issues of that. That's really good. If you're a big sucker for anthology horror, I would definitely recommend The Ice Cream Man. And as for books, Joe Hill's stuff is great. I can always recommend Stephen King, of course, just like anyone will. And, for manga, Junji Ito. And also for good horror novelists, I really recommend Otsuichi. I recently read his novel Goth and thought it was really good. And he's got some other works that have been printed into multiple languages, so I really recommend his stuff, especially if you're a big fan of like the psychology of killers and murderers, because his work seemed to delve into that a lot. And as always, my favorite horror novel of all time is House of Leaves.
I was going to recommend that.
Yeah, chills me to the core.
Yep.
Read some Lovecraft if you can. And, as for horror films, we've recommended a ton on here to you, so I guess I'll just follow up by saying, some of those. And finally, for the really fun part, I'm going to recommend some horror games.
Ooh.
Oh, yes.
If you can, try to find some of the old Human Entertainment Clock Tower games, particularly the Super Famicom one. There's actually a bunch of fan-made SNES cart versions that you can buy off eBay that work perfectly fine on North American SNESs if you have a functioning one, and they're not too expensive. That, or, emulation is a thing. But if you want to get the cool physical cart, I really recommend buying one of those fan-made ones off eBay. I've been meaning to myself, and I heard they work fantastically. Another guy I forgot to shout out, but this works out. There will be a really cool horror FMV game coming out pretty soon in the next year or so called Ghosts. I really want to recommend. It takes place in England, and you play essentially like a television producer sort of person for a ghost hunting TV show that's down and out and on its luck. And on your latest broadcast, a bunch of stuff goes awry, and it just goes horribly wrong. It's made by the same crew that made this really good low-budget indie horror film called Host, which is exclusive to Shudder. I really recommend that. And this time around, all the ghost designs will be done by internet-famous creature monster designer Trevor Henderson, who some of you probably know as Slimy Swamp Ghost, most famous for creating the viral Siren Head monster.
And Longhorse.
And Longhorse, yes.
It smells like cinnamon.
And as for other horror stuff, Puppet Combo has released his first full-length horror game, Murder House, on consoles, which means that this is the first Puppet Combo game to get a console release. I really recommend buying the digital versions of that. Well, you can only buy digital. It's not physical. And it's really creepy, especially if you're a fan of, PS1 era low polygonal art style.
Think like Resident Evil.
Yeah, think Resident Evil. It even has Resident Evil / original Alone in the Dark style tank controls, and you can mess with the video settings to essentially make it look more and more like old crappy VHS footage if you want, or turn it down.
Sounds kind of like Vaccine, but not crap.
His stuff's really good. He's really cool, so I recommend buying that. And it's pretty cheap, too. I think Murder House is only $12 on digital platforms right now. Also, if you can on Switch, and it's a bit more pricey, but it's obscure, and I'd really like to recommend it. Yomawari. It's this 2D, 2.5D style horror game that's based around Japanese culture and urban legends and stuff like that. It's highly reminiscent of Silent Hill in the way it plays and it's styled, but it's also like a Zelda clone in a way. It's really unique, really creepy. I highly recommend that. And also, Fatal Frame has made a comeback with a re-release of Maiden of Black Water. You can buy that digitally in any region off of the PlayStation Network for PS4 and PS5, or for Switch. I believe they also brought it back, and it's also on PC now. And if you want to, you can check out some of the other stuff put out by that. And as always, if you can find old copies of the original Silent Hill games, give them a play. Silent Hill 1 is available on the older PlayStation Network that's accessible on PS3s, PSPs, and Vitas. So get that if you can on there. Or, pay the exorbitant prices for the original copies.
Good luck.
That's your best bet, honestly. I say good luck with that. But whatever you do, if you want to experience Silent Hill, don't buy the HD collection. It's a butchered port. And
oh boy.
If you want to experience a good Silent Hill game, but also don't want to have to pay for those old collection prices or the HD stuff, check out Shattered Memories. It's pretty affordable, and you can get it on the Wii. It's very different from the other Silent Hill games, and I feel it hits a little harder if you're more familiar with the original Silent Hill, at least premise-wise, but it's still a fantastic horror game and one of my favorite Silent Hill games. And other than that, check out some horror YouTubers. In particular, I really recommend Nightmind, who covers a lot of cool horror YouTube stuff, and bedtime stories.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Those are my two big shout-outs for online horror content that I'm going to make. Who would like, and I think that's going to end it for me for now, who would like to make some other recommendations?
Hi, Richie here, and I'd like to first and foremost apologize for how brief my segment's going to be in comparison to Daulton, who is, let's be real, the real horror aficionado.
What can I say? I know a lot, and I was literally trying to do like a bunch of bullet point stuff because I didn't want this podcast, since this is just a short update, to go on forever.
Yeah, but I do have a few recommendations of my own in regards to potential movies, games, literature, and what have you to recommend this season for you. My face kind of lit up when Daulton brought up horror comics because there's actually a few that I remember revisiting from when I would scrounge through the library of my high school. And one such comic recommendation is a horror comic called We Kill Monsters. It's a short little mini-series from Image about a pair of brothers who run an auto shop business and find all sorts of crazy occurrences going on, discovering ultimately that their hometown is overrun by monsters. One of the brothers loses his arm, ends up being forced to drink monster blood, and gains a monster arm, and the two of them, well, set up a monster killing business and try to get to the bottom of the source. It's a lot of fun. It's actually legitimately creepy if you're a fan of body horror, and it hits a kind of sweet spot for me in that it is reminiscent of what I call blue-collar horror stories like Tremors or Slither.
Deliverance.
Oh, yeah. Much more on the monster movie end of things, like Tremors or Slither, though.
Not like actual, oh fuck, what's going on? This is Deliverance.
Yeah.
Pedal faster, I hear banjos.
But it's a fun ride and actually legitimately harrowing because of the aforementioned body horror stuff involved with the monster arm. So pick that up if you can find it on Image's websites. On the video game end of things, I think this actually rings pretty relevant because Daulton had mentioned that Suda51 had gotten the rights back for an IP he had made with EA, unfortunately. That game is Shadows of the Damned. An action-adventure, borderline horror game about a demon hunter trying to save his girlfriend. That is the basic premise that does not do enough justice to the bone and metal designs that go into the monsters and environments, the fun road trip tone that goes on that is very reminiscent of movies like Evil Dead and Drag Me to Hell, and just some wonderful voice work from the likes of Steve Bloom as the main character Garcia Hotspur and Greg Ellis as his sidekick Johnson. I want people to check this out if they own a PS3 or Xbox 360 somehow. And I'm hoping by drawing more attention to it, that means it'll get a re-release on Steam or some other service, because Suda51, the developer, had just announced that he got the rights back from the monsters, the real monsters at EA. And that and Garcia's appearance in Travis Strikes Again makes me hopeful that we haven't seen the last of the demon hunting duo.
Yeah, and even if you have trouble finding copies in stores of those, I don't think it goes for much online at this point. It's not like the most well-known Suda game. So last time I checked the secondhand market for that game, copies aren't super expensive for it. Particularly the PS3 copies seem to not be very expensive.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And also, quick shout out for a couple horror manga I forgot to mention. Check out the new satirical horror comedy Zom 100. Same goes for Zombieland Saga, which is a really funny satirical horror comedy anime. And as for horror anime in general, I really recommend Perfect Blue.
Oh, yes.
That's a lot of fun.
Best movie I'd never want to watch again.
And
You and me both.
Yeah, and also if you really like zombie manga, in my opinion, the best zombie manga of all time is I Am a Hero, a very realistic look and take on what a zombie apocalypse would be like if it broke out in Japan.
Oh.
And the main protagonist is a manga assistant who's down and out on his life, partially due to the fact that not a lot of people know how to help with mental health in Japan. And he has audiovisual hallucinations. And he has to learn how to deal and cope with that, along with balancing out the zombie apocalypse. But he's in luck because he's one of the few people in Japan who actually went through the whole legal process of owning a gun and knows how to actually use them. So it's really interesting, very deconstructive stuff that I highly, highly recommend. And, there's a bunch of great horror anime out there you can check out and look up. I'm just going to say skip the Corpse Party anime.
Oh, mm-hmm.
It's a very poor adaptation of the games. And, Corpse Party came out on the Switch, so you can play the re-released version of that.
Go get that.
Yeah. Some of the best audio mixing of any horror game out there.
Yeah. And a terrifying performance from Ikuye Otani. Like, say what you will about all the adaptations of Corpse Party, but if you thought that Pikachu's voice actress couldn't be scary, oh boy. But...
Oh yeah, she plays the
Sachiko.
Yeah, she plays Sachiko. Yeah.
But getting back a bit to horror comics, I actually was reminded in the middle of this very recording of my favorite one-shot horror comic. It's a black and white graphic novel by Demonology 101 artist Faith Erin Hicks, and it is called Zombies Calling. A satirical zombie horror comedy about college campus life and how the rules of zombie movies could save your life. Think Ghost World meets Zombieland. It's got really awesome black and white art that nonetheless is super distinct thanks to Faith Erin Hicks's ability to draw facial expressions and action. It's just really funny, too, with some really great low and highbrow jokes, and the fact that the quote-unquote rules of zombie movies are utilized in some ways more clever ways than Zombieland, even though I like those two movies.
I haven't seen the second Zombieland movie, but I loved the first one when it came out.
Second's good.
Second's good? Okay,
good
I
enough.
haven't seen it myself.
Not as good as the first one, but if you want to see more of these characters, you should do it.
One of those deals.
Just because the acting still is great, especially from Woody Harrelson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he always seemed to have fun with those movies.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, Zombies Calling by Faith Erin Hicks. Look it up. Faith Erin Hicks. Look it up. I'm sure it's out there in local comic stores or on Amazon. It's one of her most acclaimed independent solo efforts. And I think she deserves so much traffic because she is just a great artist for drawing adult situations in cartoony yet stylized and distinct ways.
Yeah.
Like, I really hope that her stuff keeps getting traffic because she really is that talented.
Oh, this reminds me. Do we want to shout out any horror TV shows?
TV shows.
Yeah, because there's not a ton out there, but I can make a few quick recommendations. Shudder has a TV version of Creepshow, the old movie series.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, they're really solid. I'd recommend those. Of course, you can always check out the old Tales from the Crypt TV show, which is great.
A top 10 list of which can actually be seen on my old Rich Reviews website.
Yeah.
Yet to be determined if I am going to continue in the work, but still check that out because I love those 10 episodes. And I want to thank you, Daulton, for that recommendation that you included on that list.
And a documentary series that's on Shudder as well, Cursed Films. I highly recommend it. Cursed Films is a documentary series where they interview the cast and crew of different films that were known to have troubled or, in some to believe, cursed productions. Movies such as The Exorcist, Poltergeist, and even The Crow.
Oh. Speaking of which, might as well just recommend The Crow to you.
Oh, yeah.
We were going to
do the original Crow comic, read it. Also, the film's great. And, yeah.
We were going to do an episode on the film before the world exploded.
Yeah.
And also before we decided that there were scenes in that movie that were a little too
much.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, if you can find the TV show Nosferatu, put out as NOS4A2, like a license plate. It's based off the novel, the same name from Joe Hill. It's a really good adaptation of it. Really good magical realism stuff in that. And I also can highly recommend the Channel Zero series, which I'm a big fan of. It's got a cult following, and the creators of that also made a Netflix exclusive horror series called Brand New Cherry Flavor you should check out. Channel Zero is really good, though. It's actually based off internet urban legends, particularly creepypastas. It's surprisingly good for being based off of that, considering how hit or miss creepypastas are. It helps that they only have really adapted some of the most critically acclaimed ones out there. And each season is basically a season-long adaptation and the show's interpretation of a famous, like, creepypasta. Season 1 dealt with Candle Cove. They did a whole thing about that. Season 2 dealt with the infamous and really good No End House, which is a fantastic one I would recommend. And Season 3 dealt with Search and Rescue Woods. I can't remember what Season 4 dealt with, but that was another one that they did. And yeah, I just really recommend that TV show.
And on the record of Manga, an older one that I'd recommend is Pet Shop of Horrors.
Oh yeah.
Campy title, but it is a truly macabre and atmospheric manga series about a mysterious pet shop owner who...
I've seen a bit of it. It's very Twilight Zone.
Oh, very Twilight Zone, very early seasons of Tales from the Crypt, and the titular pet shop is one that sells bizarre and exotic pets, usually creatures of different mythologies or just original monsters of their own creation. Each chapter revealing more about the owners of those pets than the pets themselves.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and if you can get any copies of... Well, actually, the copies of the manga are readily available, but expensive. Read Monster.
Oh,
absolutely,
yes.
Read Monster. And if you can find the anime, watch the anime. The anime is a fantastic adaptation of the manga.
Great animation, great English dub, especially for Johann Liebert. Oh, wow.
Very hard to find, but if you can get your hands on it, top tier stuff. I can't recommend heavily enough.
You will have so much trouble sleeping, but it'll be worth it.
All right, my turn. So I'm going to make recommendations. Some of them may be older TV shows, movies, books, video games, but they're just some of my favorites. The first recommendation I'm going to make is an old show. Well, not old. I mean, it ended maybe 4 years ago. It's an old Showtime series, Penny Dreadful.
Oh, yeah.
It was one of my favorite TV shows. It kind of fell apart at the end of the third season. I will completely say that. But if you love gothic horror, go watch Penny Dreadful. The main characters include Dorian Gray, Victor Frankenstein, and some characters from Dracula, including Mina Harker herself.
Oh. Sounds like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but good.
It was very good. And fantastic acting from, I almost said Vanessa Ives, that's the character name. Eva Green, Timothy Daulton, Reeve Carney, Billy Piper. Fantastic acting. It was incredibly well written. I've heard some people say, oh, it just seems kind of hokey, but sit through it. You will love it. This is going to go way, way, way back to the 1920s. If you can, it's available on Shudder. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is one of the earliest horror films ever made.
Look at that highbrow reference.
Yeah. And it's very good. It's a silent film, so if you're not into silent movies, probably not your thing.
But you never know.
But you never know, because I've seen some. I used to be like, ugh, silent films, and then I watched a bunch of silent films for an old YouTube channel I did back in high school, and also for like some film classes and that kind of thing, and I loved it. Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
For those unaware, it's part of the German Expressionist movement, which essentially took early elements of film but added very theatrical stuff to film, particularly with the set design. Like, everything has very warped, bizarre proportions and angles and stuff like that feel like unnatural.
Very theatrical.
Very theatrical.
If you're a big fan of Tim Burton, check out that in particular, because Tim Burton's early film work pre-Disney is very German Expressionist in influence.
Yes, and also, there is one thing I will say. There is a twist ending, and you are going to be very surprised by it, because it's something that people are like, oh, okay, whatever, nowadays. But when you take a look at it through the lens of something in the 1920s...
It's very modern.
It's an incredibly modern twist ending. Another recommendation I was going to make, as of movies, is 2 films. One called Occult. Actually, well, actually, I have quite a few films. Occult, which is a Japanese horror film.
A Koji Shirashi movie.
A Koji Shirashi movie. I probably mispronounced that, even though you just said it. That follows the main character who survives a stabbing attack in Japan, and then weird things start to happen around him. He starts to see things that other people can't see, and have strange experiences around him. And a documentary crew follows him around and tries to figure out, hey, what's going on, what's causing this. Great film. Another one is another documentary style horror film. This one is called Ganjiam, The Asylum. It's a South Korean. I was just gonna say Korean. It's a South Korean horror film, also done in a documentary style. It follows a film crew going into an abandoned asylum to investigate during a live stream. Yeah,
it's actually based off a real life asylum that was still standing up until a few years ago. A company bought it out, never did anything with it, and just tore the asylum down. But it's actually based off a real asylum.
Crazy.
Yeah, and also some of the stories that are in the movie are based off of stories like urban legends and that kind of thing surrounding the asylum in real life.
Yeah, if you live in upper state New York, think Cropsey.
Yeah, think Cropsey, and I believe not upper state New York. I think that was Staten Island. Yeah, that was Staten Island.
Oh, Staten Island, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of Cropsey, a podcast I can recommend is My Favorite Murder if you're into true crime. If you haven't checked it out, Karen Kilgariff and Georgia, I'm forgetting her last name. They're hilarious when talking about true crime stuff, and I highly recommend it. I've been listening to it for a few months now, and definitely can recommend it.
And on that note, I've actually forgotten to recommend something on YouTube. Check out Scaredy Cats, hosted by Scaredy Matt, who will give you all sorts of introspective and detailed looks at the messages of horror films that you've heard of and some that you might not have. Expect all sorts of dives into political commentary, the dynamics of horror, and wet puppets.
I also, that brings me to a horror documentary I really want to recommend really quickly. Very specifically, 3 ones actually. I really recommend Camp Crystal Lake Memories. It's very long, but very worth it. It's a detailed look at every single nightmare, at every single Friday the 13th movie, with interviews from the cast, directors, crew. That's just very insightful, very funny, very entertaining. And similarly, I'd also like to recommend the one that they did for the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. That was very similar in nature, also incredibly good. I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's readily available on Shudder. And finally, the Shudder exclusive horror documentary that got me into horror documentaries, My Gay Nightmare.
Oh.
It's a really good horror documentary all about the life of, I believe his name is Mark Patton, the guy who played the lead in Nightmare on Elm Street 2, which was a film that was critically panned at the time despite being a commercial success. And a lot of critics and a lot of countercultural people wrote about the weird gay subtext that seemed to be all over the place in the film. And it essentially wrecked the life of its main star. And the film is essentially a retrospective on that specific Nightmare on Elm Street movie, his life, dealing with being an openly gay star in Hollywood during the Reagan era, and how much that affected him and how hard it was. And it is an insightful, deeply touching and deeply interesting horror documentary that is narrated by Night Vale's own Cecil Palmer. And he...
Listen to Welcome to Night Vale.
Yeah. And he does a fantastic job with the narration. And it is just a very touching, interesting film, especially if you are one of the many, many LGBTQ plus horror fans out there.
Oh, and I feel like such an idiot for neglecting to mention What We Do in the Shadows. That is the movie and the TV show.
Yeah, created by Taika Waititi, who most of you normal people out there probably knows, the guy who directed Thor Ragnarok. Most of his film work is much better than Thor Ragnarok, which is saying something, because Thor Ragnarok is actually one of the more solid Marvel movies out there. And
especially this one.
Yeah.
A
and
mockumentary about vampires.
Yep. Specifically, the film focuses on a group of vampires in New Zealand, and the TV show focuses on a group of vampires in Staten Island. And both feature fantastic casts. In particular, standouts are, in the movie version, Jermaine Clement, who some of you probably know from Flight of the Conchords, and in the TV show version, Matt Berry, who many of you probably know from The IT Crowd and other British TV shows like Snuffbox.
Both are just great. They're funny, they're dark as hell, but also, weirdly enough, pretty endearing. Just great casts all around.
Yeah, you'll definitely grow attached to a lot of the characters, especially in the American version of the TV show, which has like a bunch of great cameos from various like actors and stuff. I was pleasantly surprised in season 2 to have a multi-part episode dealing with Haley Joel Osment, who was freaking hilarious.
Oh yeah.
And in particular, season 2 has what is probably one of the most famous and popular episodes of the show, which deals with Mark Hamill as a vampire that's literally just named Joe the Vampire.
That is my favorite.
Yeah, Jockey Daytona. That whole episode is great.
Okay, and as for YouTube channels, there's a couple I can recommend. One being Nick Spears. Daulton and I watch his channel.
I forgot to mention Nick's.
Yeah, Nick Spears does a lot of videos on horror movies.
Yeah.
And another one that I can recommend is In Praise of Shadows.
Yeah, great
nice.
channel.
In Praise of Shadows has also done a lot of things on horror movies and also just horror media in general. One series I would recommend that he did a very long two or three-parter on the history of witchcraft, which is a very interesting documentary. Well, I guess you would call it a documentary series. Some other recommendations I will make is on the topic of witchcraft. This one's become a cult hit, and the reason we don't cover it on the podcast is because I'm pretty sure all three of us have seen it. Is the movie The Craft?
Actually,
Oh, you haven't seen The Craft?
no.
Yeah, I've actually only seen bits and pieces of The Craft. I haven't seen.
Okay, we'll have to cover that on a future podcast episode.
Yep.
I
I'll
recommend
make
it.
up for my screw up today.
It can be kind of campy sometimes, and some people say, "Oh, that's a dumb movie," but I love it so much.
Oh no, camp! My one weakness. Richard Eckert's one weakness.
No, we hate camp. We hate camp so much.
But one thing I am going to say is they did a lot of research into the production of it. Obviously, they had to come up with a different name of the god that they worship to avoid any type of backlash. But they did some research into actual Wicca and witchcraft, into the production of the craft. So I do appreciate that. Let me think of some other recommendations. Another old video game, Eternal Darkness.
Yep.
Sanity's Requiem.
Oh yeah.
It's getting harder and harder to find, but I highly recommend it. It's a GameCube game. But if you have a GameCube and can find a copy, play it.
Yep.
Another game I can recommend is Clive Barker did some old point and click horror games back in the 90s for PC. Highly recommend those. Undying being one of them. Another one, I'm not sure if it's Clive Barker or not, but there was another one called Sanitarium.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with that one. Yeah.
My dad got me into a lot of old PC horror games when I was young.
Which brings me around to another thing that he also recommended to me. I've played a bit of the point and click one, read the novel. If you can get the Gabriel Knight stuff, they're really good.
Ooh, yeah,
Oh,
Gabriel Knight.
Particularly the GOG re-release and remaster of the first game is fantastic. And if you're a big fan of voice acting in general, I really recommend those games. Gabriel is actually played by the great Tim Curry himself. And
Master.
Treasure Island.
Gabriel's very dim-witted but lovable buddy who works in the New Orleans police is actually voiced by Mark Hamill.
Great cast all around. And while we're on the subject of older horror games, although this one is more point and click, I'd still recommend it by virtue of being terrifying. Pick up the PC game I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream,
Yeah.
an adaptation of the Harlan Ellison short story of the same name. It is probably my favorite take on the horrors of artificial intelligence because of just how far that game goes to show you how much trouble you'd be in if a computer controlled everything and went out of its way to kill you with its control.
And I'm trying to think of some other recommendations because I had some in my head earlier.
Oh, good one. If you love horror out there in general, Broadway is showing the Beetlejuice musical again, which our friend, a friend of ours, Sammy, she's said great things about it, and a lot of people online say it's a lot of fun. Same goes for if you can find any recordings of the Addams Family musical, which is also a blast. And finally, we would love to give a shout out to Evil Dead the Musical, which is doing production and tours again around the country, particularly North America, including Canada. If you can catch a performance of Evil Dead the Musical, it is great, bloody fun.
Emphasis on the bloody.
Literal sense,
Yeah.
They actually do have blood splatter that comes out over the first few rows of the audience.
Yeah.
We left the theater looking like we were in a slasher movie.
Yeah.
I was wearing a raincoat, leaving the theater looked like
I wasn't
American
even
Psycho.
I wasn't even in the first 3 rows either, which are
We
the
were in, like,
designated
row E.
splash row, which is the designated splash zone. It's a lot of fun, especially if you're a huge fan of the Evil Dead franchise, and it's probably the best film or TV Evil Dead production out there. It's on par and on the level, I would say, so far as the films and the TV show Ash vs. Evil Dead itself.
Watch that too, by the way, because Ash vs. Evil Dead is good, funny, gory fun.
Yep, with a very diverse cast, which I appreciated. And if you can get a copy, the Evil Dead video games are very, very hit or miss, but I will say Fistful of Boomstick is a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah. Great fun, that one.
And my last recommendation will be I believe it was a Japanese horror film called One Cut of the Dead. That we also a lot of these are on Shudder. Daulton and I watched on Shudder. It's basically about a film crew trying to create a zombie movie.
And then stuff goes horribly wrong.
Stuff does go absolutely horribly wrong, and it is fantastic and beautiful and hilarious to watch.
But
I highly recommend
not
it.
in the way you think it will. This is the first time you're hearing of this film, for the love of God, do not look up anything about it. Don't spoil yourself on this movie.
Don't spoil yourself for the movie.
Because it goes places, is all I'm going to say.
Cool.
People always say, wait until after the first half hour, because that's even in the advertising, is like, stick with it. And trust me, you will.
It's worth it.
It's worth it. It goes places you would not expect in the best way. It's super entertaining and funny, and one of the best horror comedies, and just, I think in general, things about like filmmaking I've seen in years.
And I will end my selection of recommendations with something I actually alluded to way back in the beginning. That movie being Slither. That was one of James Gunn's first big budget horror movies.
Yeah.
After graduating from Troma Entertainment. People forget it, but James Gunn made himself famous for more horror or exploitation-oriented stuff, and this one is a fun, gory, frankly disgusting tribute to sci-fi B horror movies of the 50s about worms that take over humans' bodies and multiply into uncontrollable numbers. Fans of stuff like The Blob or Invasion of the Body Snatchers or stuff like Killer Clowns from Outer Space, you owe it to yourself to see that one, especially since no other movie can have you say you saw Michael Rooker turn into a worm zombie.
Oh yes, and to close everything out, there are horror films out right now that you can check out. In particular, I personally would say probably avoid Halloween Kills, especially if you like the 2018 Halloween movie. I think it was a dumb decision to make these into a trilogy. Absolutely check out the tie-in Ghost song, though, because Ghost kicks ass. And
oh, yes.
if you like horror in general, check that band out, because they have a very campy horror aesthetic that I think is delightful. And as for good horror movies, go watch Last Night in Soho. It's Edgar Wright's first horror film he's ever doing, and it just came out, and it is apparently phenomenal. So, yeah, go check that out, especially if you're a fan of the 60s Soho music and art scene.
Yep.
And I know we mentioned this one before, but if you have Shudder, go watch Color Out of Space. I know we mentioned it last week on the podcast. But if you're a fan of Lovecraft, watch Color Out of Space. It's a great adaptation, and Nicolas Cage puts in a fantastic performance. And this is coming from someone who used to not like Nicolas Cage.
Speaking of Nicolas Cage, watch Mandy.
Yeah. Oh, and if you just love campy horror fun in general, watch Willy's Wonderland. It is a delight.
Nicolas Cage is kicking ass as far as horror is concerned.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If you ever doubted Nicolas Cage's acting abilities, watch Willy's Wonderland. He plays an entirely silent protagonist, which is such a rarity, especially in horror.
And unless there's anything anyone else would like to recommend, I'd like to apologize because the delay in the Near Dark episode is entirely my fault. I really underestimated how much lost media this was. Which is disappointing to me because, trust me guys, the wait will be worth it.
We'll come back.
Couple weeks from now, give or take, due to some prior commitments, but tune in in the middle of November for Near Dark and whatever my co-hosts have planned.
Yep, we'll get back to you on that. I'll let Erin decide on what the final episode for November will be. We'll probably only put out 2 episodes in November due to timing constraints and stuff. But yeah, have a happy Halloween, eat some candy, watch some horror films, or entertain yourself however you want, and just have a good one.
And be safe out there.
Yep.